Everybody. Thank you for joining us. The structure of tonight's event will be first an introduction, and then a presentation from Folklorist and Investigator Benjamin Radford. And lastly, some time to answer any questions and take comments. If you have any technical difficulties, feel free to type in your concern in the messenger box. Please hold any questions for Benjamin until the end of the presentation. To ask a question or make a comment, please type it in the messenger box or that Q&A box you see, and we'll answer them at the appropriate time. Now an introduction to Ben. Benjamin Radford is an award-winning author, co-author, and editor of over 20 books and thousands of articles on a wide variety of topics, including urban legends, the paranormal, critical thinking, and media literacy. Radford is co-founder and co-host of two podcasts, Monster Talk, which was the winner of the 2012 Parsec Award, and his current podcast, Squaring the Strange. Tonight, folklorist and investigator Benjamin Radford uncovers the true story of the Chemo Theater. The Chemo Theater ghost, as he separates fact from fiction. This presentation is based on a chapter in his 2014 book, Mysterious New Mexico, Miracles, Magic, and Monsters in the Land of Enchantment, which you can check out at your local library. Please welcome Benjamin Radford and enjoy the history and haunting of the Chemo Theater. Thank you, Ben.
Well, thank you, Jessica, and thank you for I'm looking into the audience, the virtual audience there. I'm sure there's some of you out there. I won't be responding to chats, but I will be until, of course, the end. So yes, thank you for the introduction. This is cool. I've given talks at the Santa Fe Library, I think 2 or 3 times. And the last couple of times they were standing room only, so they had to keep bringing in chairs and people were spilling out. And so one of the silver linings of the pandemic, probably the only silver lining I can think of, is that I and a lot of other people are doing a lot of virtual talks now. So it gives everybody a front row seat. So maybe you're having popcorn or whatever else. It's only 6 o'clock here, of course. If it were darker around midnight or something, then it might be a little spookier. But of course, fewer people show up at midnight. And so I understand that. So without further ado, I will begin my PowerPoint presentation on the haunting of the Chemo Theater. So this is one of my favorite investigations. I had actually I've done investigations on many different things, as she mentioned, from crop circles to ghosts to urban legends, Bigfoot, chupacabras, what have you. I always sort of try to bring a scientific perspective to it and a folkloric perspective. I am a member of the American Folklore Society, and a lot of times folklore really informs my investigations and trying to figure out what's going on here. And I had done a couple books on various mysteries in other places in the country and around the world. And then finally someone said, hey, what about the chemo? I was like, oh yeah, that's right. There's the haunted Chemo Theater ghost, which of course I had grown up with, I'm here in Ray Rancho, just outside Albuquerque. So growing up, I had often heard about the Chemo Theater ghost, and of course every Halloween, including right about now, of course there's blogs and TV shows, whatever else, that bring up the Chemo Theater story. So it was a perpetual mystery that kept coming up. And I just hadn't had a chance to actually do any investigations into it. So finally I said, okay, fine. Let me turn my attention to one of Albuquerque, New Mexico's most famous hauntings, and that is the Chemo Theater. As Jessica mentioned, this is one of the chapters in my book, Mysterious New Mexico, which is available at libraries and finer bookstores. I always encourage people to get them from independent local bookstores, but that's not always possible, especially these days. But if you're interested, there's more on this there. So I imagine many of you probably are familiar with the Chemo Theater, although frankly, we may be having people from all across the country. I don't really know. I'm guessing most people who are tuning in are probably from Santa Fe, Taos, Albuquerque area. If you're not, then here's a little introduction. This is the story of one of the most famous haunted theaters in the Southwest. It is downtown Albuquerque on Central Avenue. It's about a 20-minute drive from where I am. And it's a beautiful place. If you haven't seen it, go check it out next time you're downtown. It was built in 1926 and it opens its doors in 1927 on September 19th. And as I mentioned, it's downtown at 421 Central Avenue. And it's one of the main historical landmarks in Albuquerque. It has this really interesting Art Deco style and these Native American motifs, especially on the inside. And not only is it sort of course, a well-known local landmark, it's also the best-known haunted theater in New Mexico, if not the entire Southwest. Now, there's lots of haunted places, not only in New Mexico, but the Southwest. There's the St. James Hotel, for example, in Cimarron. There's La Fonda in Santa Fe. There's the Albuquerque Press Club here in Albuquerque, and so on. But in terms of theaters, it's probably the best-known theater, haunted theater in the state. And as I mentioned before, it's been the subject of many, many TV shows, books, blogs, online articles, and things like that, and even a handful of ghost hunter investigations. I can think of at least 3 or 4 over the years where local ghost hunter groups from Albuquerque or elsewhere will come and do an investigation overnight and research the history and things. And so I figured, well, why not go ahead and see if I could dig into it. As I mentioned, there are many places where you can find information about the KiMo Theater. There's a couple of Cody Polston's books. There's Antonio Garces, the Adobe Angels, and so on. And the Channel 13 Carrie also dug into the story. So, for example, here you see ghost hunters finding their evidence. So the story of the KiMo Theater really begins in 1951. As I mentioned, it was successful for the first quarter century, and it hosted films and vaudeville, and it was a very, very successful theater, one of Albuquerque's main ones, of course, in that time. But just before 4 o'clock on Thursday afternoon, August 2nd, 1951, there was an explosion. About 1,000 people were in the theater to see the Abbott and Costello film, Coming Around the Mountain, when a water heater supplying the concession stand exploded into the lobby. And this is documented. This is not part of some, I mean, it is part of a legend, but this is a factual thing. This actually happened. Here, for example, is the front page of the Albuquerque Journal, one of 2 newspapers, the other one being the now defunct Tribune. And there it has right there, theater blast kills boy, 7 hurt. And when you actually look at the original reporting, it's really kind of interesting. So what happened was that this young boy, Bobby Darnall, was up in the balcony, and he was there with a couple of friends, and he got scared by a loud siren in the film. Before the Abbott and Costello film, there were newsreel shorts, and one particular one was about the Air Force and air raid sirens. Again, this is early 1950s, and in one of the newsreels, there was this really loud siren, and he got scared and he ran out of the balcony, followed quickly by 2 of his friends. And unfortunately, just as he turned down the stairs, this is when the boiler exploded. There on the left, you can see the boiler explosion. On the right is how it looks today. Since that time, of course, the KiMo Theater has been changed and remodeled in different ways, but the basic structure is still there, and so you can see the damage that was done in the explosion. So, as they say in theaters, the show must go on. Repairs were made, wounds were bandaged, and the KiMo soon reopened. And services were held for Bobby on August 4th, and he was buried in Albuquerque's Fairview Cemetery. And that was pretty much the extent of it. It was a tragic accident. Several people were injured. I think one person lost an eye, but he was the worst. And as I mentioned, he unfortunately died. But nobody really thought much more about it. It was just this thing that happened until a few decades later, when Bobby had returned. So this is sort of the origin of the Chemo Theater ghost story. And I'll just this quote here is taken from Adobe Angels, the Garces book that I mentioned, and I'll just read it for you here quickly. It says, Bobby Donald returned in the most spectacular fashion, according to Jewel Sanchez, who was at the theater in the 70s. One Christmas day in 1974, there was a performance of some sort, and a member of the crew who was unaware of the donut tradition. You're wondering, where did the donuts come in? I'll come to that in a second. Saw the collection of sweets hanging on a water pipe and, apparently disgusted with the sight, removed them and placed them into the trash. I was told that as soon as they were removed, all sorts of weird and negative stuff began to happen. Anything that could go wrong did go wrong. Props which had been well anchored to the floor toppled over, as if intentionally pushed by invisible hands. While going through the live performance, the actors tripped and fell over an invisible object. Some actors said that their fall felt as if it was caused by a pair of invisible hands that quickly but firmly pushed them to the floor. So here you have these reports of the actors on stage in front of audiences who are experiencing these strange, terrifying, scary things, the hands pushing them down, things exploding, and so on. Dan Mayfield, a reporter for the Albuquerque Journal, described the consequences. Said the entire cast forgot to show up. Stage lights were popping. Once they got there, the actors forgot their lines and doors and windows were flying open. Once the donuts were replaced and Bobby was presumably appeased, the incidents mysteriously stopped. So, yes, donuts. So the idea is that the claim is that donuts were being put up to appease a ghost. Now, this is a common theme in folklore and also for monsters in general. The idea that if you don't do something for them, they will do something bad to you, right? So you might leave a penny somewhere. You might leave something out for them. Here in Albuquerque, as I mentioned, there is the Albuquerque Press Club. And one of the things that happens at the press club is people leave out a little shot of gin for the ghost. Now, presumably the ghost doesn't drink the gin, because that would be kind of weird. I mean, how would you even drink it? But anyway, so the point here is they leave out different things for the ghost. And in this particular case, the idea was that they would leave out donuts for the boy ghost, because who doesn't like donuts? I mean, I like donuts. I assume most of you like donuts. Not everybody does, but it's a pretty safe bet that a boy ghost would like donuts. And so I'll return to that part of the story in a second, but I want to emphasize here that if the story is true, it includes one of the most famous cases of public poltergeist activity in the world. The reason for this is that oftentimes when you talk to people who experience ghosts, and I have in my research and my books and stuff, for the most part, when people are talking about ghosts, they're not talking about something that is sensational, dramatic, and scary like you see in horror films. That's fictionalized, it's dramatic, actors, special effects, that sort of thing. For the most part, when ordinary people talk about their experiences with ghosts, they're talking about things that are very subtle. It's a feeling, it's a scent, it's a strange sound in a hallway. It's not something dramatic and scary. It's sort of things that are sort of mundane and could be explained by other things. And in most cases where people report ghosts, again, it's nothing that's super dramatic or anything like that. It's missing objects, little ordinary everyday things. But in this case, the story is that it was not just experienced by one or two people in their house. This was experienced by dozens or hundreds of people on stage, right in front of audiences, and there's cast and crew and all sorts of people. So if this story is true, as the story is told, it would be a really remarkable, very rare case. And this would probably be what's considered to be poltergeist activity. Poltergeist means noisy ghost in German. And poltergeists are typically thought to be these ghosts that will make sounds and basically be disruptive and things like that. So if the story is true, then this really is one of the most remarkable cases and best documented cases of poltergeists, not just in Albuquerque, maybe in the entire world, to have so many witnesses and so much evidence. So one of the problems is that when I was researching the story, one of the things that I came across was trying to figure out whether the story was fact or fiction. And one of the common things we find is that oftentimes people who are reporting these ghost stories, they'll just sort of cut and paste from other books, right? And so you see this especially with online stories, where you'll have people who are, they're writing about the Chemo Theater ghosts, and they just cut and paste off Wikipedia page, for example, which actually in this case isn't bad, because the Wikipedia page, someone mentioned that my research is actually on the Chemo Theater ghost page. But oftentimes this is one of the problems that you find as an investigator and a researcher, is that oftentimes you'll come across a story or part of a story, and it's just sort of all lumped together, and nobody's really taken much of an effort to sort it out. So rather than just rely on third-hand reporting, right? Instead of just saying, well, somebody else said X, Y, or Z, a co-investigator named Mike Smith and I decided to investigate the Chemo Theater on our own. Just start fresh. Don't believe everything we see. Don't disbelieve everything we see. Just gather as much information as we can and try and sort out for ourselves what's true and what's not true. Jewel Sanchez, who's the woman I mentioned earlier and quoted earlier, she's no longer there, and she's the one that talked about the ghost there. But the current technical manager, the one who's there to this very day, is a guy named Dennis Potter. And as it turns out, Dennis Potter comes up over and over and over again when you're looking at stories about the Chemo Theater ghost. It turns out that most of the information about the Chemo Theater ghost comes from Dennis. And that's Dennis right there. There's a photo of myself and Dennis, and there's the inside of the Chemo Theater. This photo was actually taken for the Albuquerque Journal and appeared in a newspaper article about my investigation. A little bit of trivia for you theater buffs: that light above us is called a ghost light. So spooky irony for there, in case those who missed it. So I began researching and touring the Chemo Theater. I met up with Dennis, and there on the left is the brick wall on the very back of the Chemo Theater, and this is allegedly where donuts were being put up in order to appease the child ghost Bobby. The idea being that if you didn't put up donuts or didn't do something to make him happy, he would do bad things. For example, ruining a performance, which is allegedly what happened. There's a photo of Dennis showing me where the boiler explosion was. And it was interesting because a lot of times when I'm investigating ghost stories, it pretty quickly becomes clear that much of the story is just not true. Just it's made up, it's exaggerated, whatever else. Oftentimes, what in folklore we call a foaf tale. F-O-A-F means friend of a friend, right? So you look for eyewitnesses, and someone say, "Oh yeah, my cousin, he saw this crazy thing." And you go and interview the cousin. They're like, "Oh no, it wasn't me. It was like my girlfriend's ex-boyfriend's mechanic. He saw it." And then when you go to talk to that person, it's like, "No, that wasn't me." It was so you keep going on and on trying to find who exactly is the origin of this case. What was really interesting about this case, and one of the reasons why it turned into a whole investigation, why I'm sharing it now, is that Dennis Potter confirmed the story. So this was really interesting, right? Because oftentimes, as I mentioned, when you try and investigate, try and dig into, research it, you find people are, it didn't really happen, or, there's no confirmation, there's no witnesses. In this case, Dennis said, no, the story is true. Not only that, but he was there that night. And he witnessed the whole thing. So suddenly I'm like, okay, this is suddenly taking a turn. We have a first-hand eyewitness. This is what he said. He said it was just before Christmas, and the New Mexico Repertory Theater theater company did a Christmas Carol. He explained the director, Andrew Shea, noticed the donuts strung up behind the brick walls at the end of the stage, and they just sort of accumulated there. And according to Potter, Shea had a fit about the donuts and demanded they be removed. He's like, this is Charles Dickens. This is A Christmas Carol. If you've read A Christmas Carol or you've seen adaptations of it, you may have noticed the lack of a bunch of donuts everywhere. That wasn't part of Dickens' original theme. So the story goes that the donuts were put up in order to make sure the ghost wouldn't ruin the play. And Andrew Shea said, this is ridiculous. I don't believe these superstitions, take them down. And of course, if you've ever seen a horror film, then you know that it was like, no, don't take the donuts down. Don't you know what happens? Haven't you seen these? And he's like, I don't care. So, all right, they took the donuts down, and this is what happened. So again, we're going back to what Dennis Potter, who was there that night, said. He said he's describing what happened. About 10 or 15 minutes in the show, he said weird things started going wrong. People were forgetting their lines. People were tripping and falling on stage. Odd pieces of equipment would fall from the ceiling. Light bulbs exploded. Cables fell down. So you're seeing the sort of same things that appear in a lot of the stories came from Dennis, and this is why there's lots of similarities. They were having trouble getting through the show. Windows and doors on the set either were not opening or opening when they weren't supposed to. He says it was just really weird. They almost literally didn't get through the show. There were so many disruptions. And so the cast and crew, who were stunned by this ordeal after trying to put on this performance and everything's going wrong, there's like poltergeists and ghosts, and they freaked out. And so they blamed Andrew Shea and they put the donuts back up. And according to Potter, after he apologized, he spent $50 on donuts. Again, this is $1974, so that's a lot of donuts there, and strung them up all over the building, including the lobby. This appeased little Bobby Darnall, who again was who we know died from injuries at the Chemo Theater, and from then on, donuts were left for Bobby, and then in fact to this day there's a shrine. So that's a photo of what the shrine looks like, at least as of a couple years ago. Things of course, come and go. Those things are removed, things are added. The donuts are long gone, partly because, well, health reasons, right? I mean, it's a theater. You don't want to have food that attracts roaches and rats and things like that. So the donuts are sort of are a thing of the past, which itself is a bit interesting if you think about that. Because Bobby allegedly wanted donuts, right? He didn't want trinkets. He didn't want Mardi Gras beads. But anyway, so instead of the donuts, again, to this very day, there's this little shrine. It's actually not very big. It's hard to show the scale in this. That's probably 3 feet by 6 feet or something. It's not very big at all. It's underneath some stairs. But you have people leaving objects for little Bobby, right? Just little trinkets, a coin, little things like that Bobby might like. So interestingly enough, the account of the disastrous production is the first time that the ghost of Bobby Darnall was linked to mysterious occurrences at the Chemo Theater. And it's important from an investigative point of view because it's tangible. It's something that can be verified, right? Oftentimes, when I'm investigating ghost cases, I'm told about some ghost event that happened, but I'm not given any evidence. It's just sort of like, last September, I was in my living room and I saw something weird out of the corner of my eye. What was it? Like, I don't know. I wasn't there. It could have been a ghost, could not have been a ghost. I don't know. Do you have a photograph? No. Do you have video? No. Any of the witnesses? No. And so again, in most cases, when people experience ghosts, what they're reporting is nothing that's really investigatable. It's not scientific. There's no hard evidence. It's just sort of somebody saw something weird and make of that what you will. In this case, there was all sorts of weird things going on, right? There were exploding lights. There were doors opening and closing, people being pushed down by invisible hands. These sorts of things are much closer to hard evidence, and they're something that an investigator can really dig into and try and confirm. So in trying to solve this mystery, I was realizing, well, something ruined this performance of A Christmas Carol on Christmas Day, 1971, right? I mean, I don't know what it was, but according to Dennis, And the stories, something happened. If it wasn't a ghost, it could have been something else, but something did it. Or did it? See, this is where the investigation comes in. So Mike and I were trying to, again, get at the true facts of the story. You know, we love the legends, we love the stories, we love the ghost stories. It's all really interesting. But at the end of the day, part of what we want to do is, yeah, this is cool, but is it also true, right? Is there good evidence for this, or is this just another, you know, hey, a weird thing happened to me, and sort of story. So the first step in unraveling this mystery was verifying the date. So this is one of the first steps you do as an investigator, is you get the journalism, right? Who, where, when, who, what, where, when, why, how, things like that. So we had to narrow down, well, when did this happen? So again, according to the book Adobe Angels, it happened on Christmas Day, 1974. So that's something to go on. So Mike and I looked into it. And so the first question was, okay, well, let's just verify the basic facts. You know, can we find an advertisement advertising a Christmas Carol play for Christmas 1974? And the answer is no. As it happens, the KiMo Theater was an adult theater. So there was no, they were playing adult films. So it was known as the Notorious Theater, the Notorious KiMo. So there was no Christmas Carol going on. No Dickens, no Charles Dickens going on here. That was not going on. So I said, Dennis, what's going on here? I mean, you know, the part of the story is this happened on Christmas Day 74. We did some research. It couldn't have been 74 because you weren't showing, plays in 74. He said, no. He said, that part's wrong. He says, no, it occurred sometime in the late 80s or early 90s. Now, that was a little weird to me, because I think that if I had experienced this once in a lifetime eyewitness of this haunted play with poltergeists and ghosts and exploding things and mysterious, I think I would remember when it was. I mean, at least the decade. I mean, my memory isn't that great, but I was a little surprised that Dennis didn't have a much clearer date. But he said, well, he wasn't really quite sure, but he said that he did remember one thing that gave us a clue. He said that that some of the kid actors, because of course, A Christmas Carol has a bunch of child actors, they had been late to a performance because they were watching, they come late from the theater watching Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home. So that narrowed it down to December 1986, because that's when that Star Trek film came out. So once we did that, we could identify which performance it was and then interview other people involved in that Christmas Carol. So we began with the actor, one of the main actors, Steve Schwartz. He played Bob Cratchit. And we contacted Mr. Schwartz, and I said, can you tell me about this ghost haunted play that you were part of? And he said, it went great. It was a wonderful performance. I'm like, but hold on. The story is that Bobby Darnall or another ghost at the KiMo Theater ruined the play. There was actors tripping and lights exploding, and we almost didn't get through it, and the whole thing. He said, quote, that sounds like good copy, but I can't corroborate any of that. He says, I don't remember any problems like that or any problems with the show at all. So this is odd, right? From an investigative point of view, because we have the popular story talking about this ruined performance, and we have Dennis Potter, who was there that night, and he said he saw these things going on, but we have somebody who we know for a fact was on stage in that play saying it went fine. So I'm trying to, sort of figure out what's going on here. Now, I have a background in psychology. I have a bachelor's in psychology from UNM, and I can tell you that, people misremember things. Human memory isn't perfect. We misperceive, we misunderstand. It's common, it's ordinary. It's just, people aren't really good at remembering things. So it's entirely possible that two different people remember two different things, or remember the same thing differently. So we needed to find somebody else, right? Somebody else who was there. So we contacted Andrew Shea, who was the director of the performance. And we told the story, said, Mr. Shea, you know, we're talking about this story, the Chemo Theater, and he also disputed Potter's recollection. He says, quote, "I don't remember it being a disaster in any way." He agreed with Potter that some of the child actors had been late for the show, but they arrived in time for their parts. And I asked him, I said, well, do you remember anything that Dennis is talking about? I mean, this is the story of the Chemo Theater ghost, this ruined performance and lights exploding and mysterious hands and whatever else. And he says, in terms of that day Dennis is talking about, no. All I remember is the kids not showing up on time. He said, there were no events during my 8 years there that didn't have mundane explanations. I don't recall anything supernatural or out of the ordinary happening. So we're trying to figure out, well, what's going on here, right? So we're sort of digging into the facts behind this ghost story. And I'm thinking, okay, well, Dennis remembers it this way. Andrew Shea and the main actor, Schwartz, remember differently. Well, what about the audience, right? I mean, let's bring in more people. Now, there was no way to know who was in the audience at the time, but maybe a critic from the local newspaper attended the play, right? Surely, if it was such a disastrous, remarkable performance that we're still talking about, you know, decades later, it would have been mentioned in the journal, right? Journals, the Albuquerque Journal, the Tribune at the time, they had theater review columns. So the mystery got even deeper because there was nothing at all. The reviews were positive and not a single one mentioned actors tripping or falling, exploding lights, or anything like that. And so I tracked down Ollie Reed Jr., who was the drama critic for the Tribune in 1986. And he's now at Bookworks, independent bookstore on Rio Grande, if I'm not mistaken. And Reed said, quote, "I don't recall any stories about any unusual events related to that production." So again, sort of as an investigator trying to get to the bottom of this mystery, we have the popular story of the Chemo Theater ghost story and the things happened, and Dennis, the main source being Dennis Potter, and then you have all these other people, some of whom were literally there that night, others who would have heard about it, and no one's coming up with anything. So all the evidence points to one conclusion, which is the ruined play, which is the kernel of the Chemo ghost story. I mean, that's the whole point. That's how we know that there is a ghost at the Chemo Theater. That's how we know it's Bobby Darnell, allegedly, according to the story, is because this one performance was ruined by supernatural entities or ghosts, whatever else. So if that part of the story is false, then the whole story kind of evaporates. It falls apart like a house of cards, because if that didn't happen, then there's no, then where did Bobby Darnell come from, right? Where did those come from? And so it was pretty clear to me that that it really was a case of basically folklore and fiction overriding the truth. And I didn't go into, Mike and I didn't go into this case trying to debunk the Chemo Theater's ghost story. I didn't know. I genuinely didn't know what to make of it. I didn't know if it was true, if it was not true. I didn't know. I just like, well, let's look into this. Let's bring some critical thinking to it. Let's do some investigation here, which unfortunately, as I mentioned, was very rare in this sort of thing. So the question then becomes, how could so many accounts have gotten it wrong? And the answer is that Dennis is the source of virtually all the information. Every Halloween and even in between, when someone is writing about the Chemo Theater story, they either interview Dennis or they revisit and quote from interviews with Dennis, and they're just repeating the stories, cut and pasting, and none of them had bothered to do any independent verification of his story. To the best of my knowledge, Mike and I were literally the first people to ever dig into it and confirm which date it allegedly was, and talk to anybody involved in it. Everybody else, they were so sort of in love with the story, which is a cool story. Again, don't get me wrong. I love ghost stories. I love legends. I love these urban myths. These things are really cool, but I also love finding out whether they're true or not. And as I mentioned, oftentimes a lot of the information would just be cut and pasted. So there was little or no actual investigation. It was just people saying, "Hey, I'm collecting, Albuquerque ghost stories. Here's the Chemo Theater one," and which is fine. I mean, that's cool. I mean, I have a chapter in my book as well. But what I did going beyond that is not just cutting and pasting what other people said. I would try to dig into it and figure out what's going on. So that brings us back for a second to the ghost hunters, right? Because as I mentioned at the beginning, the idea that there's a ghost at the Chemo Theater was, according to some ghost hunters, verified or authenticated or confirmed, or whatever word you want, by ghost hunters who went to the Chemo Theater and did their investigations. Oftentimes the investigations were, how do I put this delicately? Less than ideal, less than thorough. I'll give you one example here. So in this case, here is a photograph taken from a ghost hunter website. And there you can see what's called an orb. And the orbs are commonly discussed in ghost hunting circles, and the idea being that they're sort of small, round, sometimes glowing, sometimes white objects that look mysterious. Oftentimes they're flash reflections. They're flash reflections from dust or insects or shiny objects in the background. They're not unique. They're not particularly unusual, but a lot of ghost hunters take them as being evidence of ghosts. So in this particular case, I especially noticed this one because again, somebody took a photograph, one of many, many, many photographs, and they said, "Hey, you look at this one photo. Here's this weird thing here, over by where the boiler exploded." Right. So this actually is the part of the theater where the explosion happened. And as I mentioned, there's not one blanket explanation for orbs, and oftentimes they seem mysterious because they're not seen by the naked eye. They only appear in photographs. And this is like, oh, this is so crazy. I didn't see this thing glowing, when I didn't have the camera on. But then when I took the photograph, and then later on I went through it, I see this thing and it wasn't there in person. Well, the answer is that in most of these cases, the orb is created by the flash reflection. So, of course, you didn't see it in person because you weren't shooting out a flash coming back. So this is why a lot of orbs only appear in photographs, is because it's a function of the flash on the camera. And here's another example of orbs or dust. And here's another slot which says, this is taken from a ghost hunter website. It says, "Note the orb at location of Bobby's death." And I looked at that, and it was interesting. There's a problem here, which is that, unfortunately for their theory, the ghost hunter's theory, Bobby Darnall didn't die at the Chemo Theater. This is something that's often lost in the story. If you read the original accounts, if you read the original reporting in the Albuquerque Journal, it says that in fact the stairwell and railing were intact and undamaged in the explosion. And it says, quote, "The balcony stairs over the theaters were undamaged, but panel boards and plastering were blown in all directions, peppering everybody there." So they're also wrong about Bobby's death, because Bobby didn't die at the theater. Bobby was not killed. He died of his injuries, but Bobby didn't die at the theater. He died on the way to the hospital. And it says right there, reported, if you look in the August 2nd, 1951, police said the boy had a faint pulse when picked up at the theater lobby, but he was dead on arrival at St. Joseph's Hospital. So this raises the question, well, I mean, I guess you could say, well, there's Bobby Ghost where he was injured, which, I mean, you can make up whatever ghost rules you want, but you can't say that, here's Bobby's ghost marking the spot where he died, because he didn't die there. And I'll give you one other quick example, which is, and this is an interesting one. I came across, I think it was on KRQE, Channel 13 was doing an interview with ghost hunters. And they used what's called an EMF detector. It's a little beepy thing. It has lights. It comes up, and it detects electromagnetic fields. And many ghost hunters believe that ghosts emit or in some cases consume electromagnetic fields. And the idea is that that somehow ghosts materialize in their presence. Now, the thing is that EMFs are real. Electromagnetic fields are common. They appear in anything electrical. Computers, toasters, electric lights, cell phones, lots of things give off EMFs. And there's no proven scientific connection between EMFs and ghosts. And at one point, I'm watching this clip. I unfortunately don't have a clip of it to show you, but I'll describe it for you. So, so you have one of the ghost hunters in the KiMo Theater in the middle of a room, who's holding up this EMF detector, and it's blinking and going off, and he's like, "Oh, this is crazy! You know, I'm in the middle of the room. There's no electricity anywhere around me. This must be a ghost." And he's just like freaking out about it. I'm like, okay, well, the problem is that you're being filmed by a camera that's a few feet away, that has lots of electronic equipment on it. I mean, I've seen those cameras. I've been on TV. The batteries are the size of bricks. There's audio equipment. So it was just remarkable that the ghost hunter got so excited about finding some. It's like, oh, you know, come closer, right? So the camera comes closer. It's going off even more. Well, of course it is. If there's a huge camera with a bunch of equipment and electricity going through it, you're detecting and you're thinking it's part of a ghost. Anyway. So one thing that's really interesting about the KiMo Theater story, and one reason I like talking about it, is that it's this really interesting gray area, right? Because it's not a lie. It's not a hoax. I'm sure of that. I mean, I've talked to Dennis. He stands by his story. Dennis still believes to this day that you know, the things that he described happened. But it's pretty clear to me, again, considering all the evidence, that Dennis isn't making it up. So I'm pretty sure. I mean, I can't get into his head, but I give him the benefit of the doubt, and I don't think that he made it up for as a prank. I don't think he did it for fun. I don't think he did it for publicity for the KiMo Theater. I believe he genuinely and sincerely believes that there was something mysterious that happened in that performance that night. And when I asked him, so Dennis, you seem like a nice guy and I believe what you're saying, but you need to understand nobody else remembers this. Like literally no one else knows what you're talking about. So I don't think it's a lie. I don't think it's a hoax. I think that the KiMo Theater ghost story is a collection of myths and mistaken memories and misunderstandings that sort of coalesced and came together into this ghost story. And by the same token, I would also mention the ghost hunters, right? The local ghost hunter teams that go there and they do investigations. In most of these cases, they're sincere. They genuinely think that they're detecting ghosts, and they take a bunch of photos and there's get orb here, orb there, whatever else. And they're not hoaxing, they're not lying. They genuinely and sincerely think that they're getting evidence for ghosts. But unfortunately, they're just not going about them in ways that are quite as scientific as they would like. I'll wrap up with this photograph. This is a photo taken by Larry Barker, who's a friend of mine, a great investigative reporter. And there's me actually in the KiMo Theater holding up one of those EMF detectors. And I'm showing the camera, and this is actually a perfect example of what I was just talking about a second ago, because you can see the light coming on in my right hand. It's glowing, and there's actually two different sources of electricity. One of them is to my left, which there's an electrical outlet, which is sort of hidden underneath the chair. And to the right, of course, this giant TV network studio camera with all sorts of gadgets and nozzles and electricity going through it. So that is the story of the KiMo Theater ghost. And I'll wrap up with this sort of spooky looking Art Deco skull that you can find over there. This and a dozen other mysterious investigations can be found in my book, Mysterious in Mexico, which I'm not too proud to say won a Southwest Book Award a couple years back. Kind of cool. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and answer any questions, anything else anyone might want to have.
Thank you so much, Ben. If anyone has any questions, feel free to type them in. I have a question, Ben.
Yes, yes. Jessica in the back, the one with the cool spooky background. Yes, you.
Yeah. Do you think people want to believe in ghosts and prefer to ignore critical thinking?
I don't think it's either or. Belief in ghosts is pretty universal. When you look at the different types of beliefs around the world, ghosts are among the most common. Not everybody, not all cultures believe in in ESP or crop circles or Bigfoot, whatever else, but all cultures have some form of belief in ghosts, and part of that is because ghosts are connected in a personal way, right? Because ghosts, the idea of ghosts is that that the dead are still with us, and this can be very powerful and very emotional, right? Because it's psychologically comforting to think that ghosts are with us, and your dead grandmother is looking out for you, and if you see a penny on the street, pick it up because it might, it's pennies from heaven type story, right? So ghost beliefs per se are generally fairly harmless. And in many cases comforting. As I said, this idea that ghosts are scary is not really borne out in the research. Some ghosts are scary, but for the oftentimes, again, people find people say, I grew up in a house with ghosts, and that was Maria. She's not scary at all. She's she's fun. I know that she's there because I'll feel a sudden weird feeling, or there will be cases of missing keys, and I put my keys down and I look for them again. Oh, Maria, where's my keys? And then you go looking for them and they're somewhere else, and quit teasing, that sort of thing. So in a lot of these cases, the belief in ghosts is it's not pathological, it's not harmful, and in many cases it's comforting. There is an exception, and I'll just mention that briefly, which is that unfortunately, due in part to a lot of TV shows, such as Ghost Adventures, Ghost Hunters, that sort of thing. A lot of these shows, and I've been on a lot of these shows, I know wherever I speak, I've been on both sides of this. They're entertainment. They're not doing real investigation. I promise you, it's edited. They're not, this is not science, this is not education. These are people putting on a show and editing these things to make them more dramatic, and which is fine. TV's fine, whatever. The problem comes in when in many of these cases, the people in the shows, Zach Baggins, for example, will say they're encountering something evil and demonic. So as part of the story, as part of the narrative, that they're, scary ghost, what was that? What was that? Like, that sort of thing. A lot of times they will bring up the idea that there's something evil in the house. And this is harmful because many people will see these TV shows and take them as being serious. And I've personally met with people who are scared. And I say, why are you afraid? They say, well, I think there's something in my house. And I'll say, okay, well, why do you think it's harmful? Because I saw an episode of Ghost Adventures last night, and he saw this evil demonic thing in his house. And what if it's here with me? And I have to comfort them. I have to calm them down, say, calm down. It's okay. It's probably not a ghost. Even if it is a ghost, it's probably not something demonic. There's no reason to be scared. And so a lot of times, more science-based investigators have to spend our time sort of comforting and cleaning up after the messes that are made by these ghost hunters who are just out for sensationalism.
Sure. We have a couple questions that are similar. So
I'll let you paraphrase.
Yeah, two people are asking if any of your investigations ever impressed you as well-founded. And then second part two to that question is, are there any TV shows that are factually based?
Okay, see, I'll take the I'll take the first one first. It sort of depends on what you mean by well-founded. I mean, the Chemo Theater story is a perfect example of one where, on the surface of it, it's very legit, right? You've got people repeating stuff. You've got Dennis Potter saying this happened, and this is repeated, and it's in books and TV shows. About so, if all you watch is a TV show, if all you do is read some blog about it, it seems very impressive. But if you actually take the time to dig a little deeper, to investigate, to interview people, that's when the story sort of falls apart. So it sort of depends on what level you're approaching it, right? And so in many of these cases, the cases do become shakier and shakier the more you're asking for good hard evidence. Now that doesn't mean that if there isn't good hard evidence, that didn't happen. I mean, I've never, scientists and researchers, we have to go on evidence, right? So if someone comes to me and says, here's this craziest thing, last night, my boyfriend and I were in bed and we heard some weird knocking on our roof and nothing was there. What was it? I'm like, I don't know. I mean, it could be a ghost. It could be a squirrel. Like I haven't the faintest idea. So just because I can't explain it doesn't mean it's mysterious. It just means that I'm not being given enough information to really know. So there are some cases where there's more and more evidence that something weird is going on. In those cases, I've typically been able to explain them. I'll give you one quick example. In one of my books, Scientific Paranormal Investigation, I have a chapter on a haunting that I investigated in Buffalo, New York, when I lived there about a decade ago. And one of the claims was a guy that claimed that the ghost was kicking him, like he's actually being attacked by a ghost, which is unusual, right? I mean, people usually they see something, they hear something, they feel something. This guy was actually claiming he was kicked by a ghost. And I had explained other parts of his experiences, but the kicking was really weird. And so I investigated more deeply. And I'll spare you the details, but basically it turned out that he had what's called restless leg syndrome, or RLS. And it's better known these days because there's advertisements. If you have this, you can buy pills for it. But at the time, it wasn't widely discussed. And what was happening was that because he was being tormented by what he thought were ghosts, he would sleep apart from his wife and his young daughter and he was a big guy. He was an auto worker outside of Buffalo. And he would sleep on a lightweight cot. And what would happen is that as he would go to sleep, he would sort of calm down and relax, and his leg would twitch. And it would jerk his body in the bed, and he didn't know what it was. And this would happen on several occasions as he was going to sleep. And he would wake up out of it sincerely believing that he had been kicked or touched by a ghost. And then once I explained it to him, and once he started taking pills to deal RLS, it went away. So that's one example where something that seemed inexplicable at first, when you dig a little deeper, is actually explainable. The other question was about TV shows that are less sensational, and unfortunately, they're kind of all birds of a feather. I mean, the problem is that there's now a formula, right? The formula is a bunch of people going into a place, they turn off the lights, they have cameras around, and so the formula is to make it as dramatic as possible because that's what the networks want. And I've talked to ghost hunters who are sincere people, and they believe that they're investigating ghosts and they're doing all sorts of things, and they get irritated because they know and they recognize that what you see on TV is nothing like what they're experiencing, right? It's all this dramatic, sensational, dramatized stuff. And it's interesting because when you're on the sets of these shows and you talk to the crew members and the cast, they don't believe a word of this. They're like they know it's the producers are like, it's we have a script, we have these plot points. So in the industry, this is widely, they're like, yeah, this isn't real, and like everybody knows this is like a non-secret. But then when you get to the audiences, you have a lot of people who are skeptical, like, oh, that's silly, blah blah blah. But then you have a lot of people like, no, didn't you see that? I'm like, yeah, I saw it.
Let's see. David asks, does being skeptical hinder or help your ability to appreciate folklore and ghost stories?
That is an excellent question. Thank you, David. That is a really good question. It is a really good question. The answer is that investigators and folklorists approach ghosts from different points of view. And so I sort of wear two hats, or a couple hats: investigator, journalist, researcher, and folklorist as well. And so what you find is that if you talk to folklorists who research ghost stories and ghost experiences, and some of my friends have done that, and they've written books on it. From a folkloric point of view, the goal is to understand the phenomenon, right? From a folklorist point of view, the idea is to understand a particular narrative. How does a narrative change over time, right? So, this story is told like this in this part of the country. This story is told in a different way in another state 5 years later. What are the differences, right? Why does what does one story have to do with another story? How did it change over time? Things like that. So from a folkloric point of view, oftentimes there is no real attempt to get to the truth of it, because that sort of misses the point. The point from a folklorist point of view isn't whether it's true or not, because urban legends are a perfect example, right? Urban legends are told as true. That's part of the nature of urban legend, is they're told as true. And they say, oh, did you hear about, the vanishing hitchhiker or the beehive hairdo? I mean, I could do a whole talk on urban legends, but the point is they're told as being true. They're passed along as, well, I'm not saying it's true, but I heard, did you hear about blah, 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 right? So from a folkloric point of view, whether it's actually true is kind of beside the point, and frankly, a big pain in the ass to figure out. From an investigative point of view, I want to know whether it's true or not, right? I love the story, I love the legend, but it's like, yeah, okay, but so I guess the answer is that as a folklorist, that sort of takes me up to here, and then as an investigator, I want to go up to here to to go the extra distance and say, okay, this is cool, this is fascinating, this is scary, but is it also true? And so that's not a role that the folklorist is really interested in. And so that's sort of what blends the two. Good question, though.
Okay. We have a couple more questions. Do you have time?
I'll take two more.
Two more questions.
Make them good.
Yeah. Let's see. Have you researched the La Fonda stories? Can you debunk or confirm?
The La Fonda stories. Hold on a second. Let me look in my book, Mysterious New Mexico. Let me see here. Let's see. The staircase. The Mesa. Santa Fe's haunted La Posada. The La Posada's in there. I have researched the La Fonda. I haven't written a book chapter on it. So I have been there. I've probably investigated at some point most of New Mexico's top ghost places. At some point or another, I haven't done complete investigations on all of them. For example, I mentioned earlier at the St. James Hotel in Cimarron, I did an overnight there. I did lots of research on it, some of the ghost stories and Wild West characters that came through there. So the short answer is I have investigated the La Fonda. I have not written up a book chapter on it. You can. I will just say that maybe the ghost of La Fonda went over to the La Posada, and if so, you should check that
out. Have you had an experience on an investigation where you encountered something that you could not explain and therefore were left with the possibility that there are really ghosts?
Well, there's two parts to that question. The first part is being left with a possibility of ghosts, and the answer is absolutely. It's entirely possible, though, that ghosts exist. I have never said otherwise. It is entirely possible that ghosts exist, and all these other things do as well. So, from an investigative point of view, and a scientific point of view, I would never say that X cannot exist, whether it's chupacabras or Bigfoot or whatever else, because anything is possible. So, and I go into this with an open mind. I mean, it may seem like I'm this, mean skeptic debunker, but in fact, I'm genuinely, I want to know the truth. If the truth had been that there really is a ghost at the Chemo Theater, that's cool, right? I want to find that out. I want to see the ghost. I want to meet it. I want to shake its hand. I want to see it move things. I want to, you know, I genuinely want to experience these things and figure out what's going on. But if the answer is there's not a ghost, then we also have to sort of accept that and sort of see what we can learn from that, because that informs us about how stories are passed on, things like that. So that's the second part of the question. So I wouldn't consider myself to be to think that ghosts don't exist. I would say that in my investigations and my experiences, I have not yet found good evidence, good scientific evidence that they do. I've met lots of people who tell me ghost stories. They're sincere people. I have no reason to doubt them. But unfortunately, the evidence they offer isn't anything that, as a scientist and researcher, I can do much with. So there's lots and lots of ghost stories like that. There certainly have been times when I've been on an investigation and I've been kind of creeped out because I'm human, right? I may have written books about this. I may know a lot about ghost folklore, but at the end of the day, or the end of a long evening or early morning, it's 3 a.m, it's cold, you're in someplace weird, you hear a sound, I'm creeped out. Do I think it's necessarily some evil spirit from another dimension? No. But, you know, I, like anybody else, I can get the chills. I can sort of wonder what's going on there. And so, you know, I, like anybody else, I would, you know, could be freaked out about that. Oftentimes, I'll tell you that in my experiences, it's actually honestly other people that kind of creep me out more. So in the times when I've been in a ghost haunted location or alleged haunted location, and I've been in dozens of them, usually if I'm really kind of creeped out, it's because there's somebody else there who's kind of creeping me out, because they're like, there's demons everywhere, watch out for this. And they're sort of like really like calm down, man, calm down. It's okay. You don't rub off on me. So that's part of it. So
yeah. Thank you so much. For those of you who we didn't get to your questions, Ben Radford's going to be back with us next Wednesday on the 28th at 6 o'clock to talk about contacting the dead, seances from the Victorian era to modern times. Thank you so much, Ben. You can learn more about Ben Radford at benjaminradford.com. We also have several books available to check out in the library. Thank you to the Friends of the Library for sponsoring our programs, and like this one. Ben, you have a new book coming out, so everyone be on the lookout for Big If True, Adventures in Oddities. And be sure to check out the Santa Fe Public Library calendar for more of our events happening this month. Tomorrow evening, we have the original ghost tour of Santa Fe. Michael McGarity will be joining us on the 27th. On the 29th, we have Jane Phillips, our local Ghostbuster and psychic. Thanks again, Ben. You're the best.
thanks for having me on.
Happy hauntings. Stay safe. Read books. Good night, everyone.
Good night. See you next week.
See you next week. Thank you.